Shalom Mashpaka. I'm coming to you today to explain a verse that is not understood today, that is misidentifying the people that were afflicted for 400 years. And I'm sorry, Mashpaka. I am sorry. I am in Genesis 15, verse 13. And Yahweh said unto Abraham, Know of a surety that thy seed shall be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. And in that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterwards shall they come out with great substance. Reading on, and it says, But thou shalt go to thy fathers in good peace, and thou shalt be buried in a good old age. And the last most important verse, Mashpaka, that is not being shared and understood. Verse 16, And in the fourth generation they shall come hither again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. Mashpaka, it is believed that this verse right here speaks of slavery, of the transatlantic slave trade, when it is actually the 12 tribes of Yasharal. Follow me and I will show you. Reading verse 13, we can see where it says, Know assuredly that thou seed shall be a stranger in a land that is, and the word that is not there, in a land not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them for 400 years. Reading verse 14. And also that nation, and the word here that is used is ha-goi, which means the nation. Mashpaka, this says the nation, not plural as multiple nations. This says the nation, whom shall serve will I judge, and afterwards shall they come out with great substance. Mashpaka, if we are looking at the transatlantic slave trade, it happened to multiple nations. And from the 1500s to about the 1900s. So you would say that's 400 years. I'm back in verse 14 of chapter 15 of Genesis, and it says ha-goi, which means the nation, not plural. Go into an interlinear and you would see what I mean. Type in nations in Blue Letter Bible. Let's go into Genesis 17:14. It says nations, and it uses guim, which has the mayim at the end of it. That means plural. If it meant nations, it would have added the plural word. These are not one nation, Mashpaka. These are nations, plurals. Now, for some reason, it is believed that United States is just the chosen people, the chosen nation of all the world right now, because we are the world leader. And the slaves that were sent to North America are special from all the other slaves that have ever been sent anywhere. And people are saying that a period from 1619 to 2019 represents 400 years of African history, which is exactly what Genesis 15 says. Verse 13, And they shall sojourn in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them for 400 years. But if you do a look up of the time that slavery was in America, it started in 1619, that is correct. But it was abolished in 1865, which, if you do the math, is only 246 years. So basically, this prophecy for them serving people and afflicted for 400 years stopped happening. They stopped being slaves. They stopped serving others. So in other words, this is not them. Let me furthermore explain. Verse 14, and it says, in that nation. Let's go into that verse now. And it reads, and also Alaf Ta'u Ha Goi, which means in the nation. They shall serve, will I judge, and afterwards shall they come out with great substance. Mashpaka, slavery ended in 1865. And we have not seen any reparations for slavery since then. In fact, Mashpaka, no African nations or descendants of enslaved Africans have received formal large-scale reparations from countries where they were enslaved. None have paid. There have been no reparations at all. And this is for all the world that received slaves. No one has paid. So where is the great substance that they were supposed to receive? This is what I would like to share, Mashpaka. In the United States, African Americans have formally proposed reparations through this bill, which is a bill that has been introduced annually since 1989, and most recently in the 119th Congress from 2025 to 2026. So for almost 40 years, this bill has been trying to establish people reparations for slavery. And it basically calls for establishing a commission to study and develop reparation proposals for African Americans due to slavery and systematic discrimination. Additionally, this bill, introduced in 2023 and 2025, recognize the U.S. government morals and legal obligations to provide reparations for the lasting harm of slavery. And none of these proposals have been passed. So therefore, nothing has been happened yet. And what I am sharing of the story of what is being painted is that it will not happen, because people are forgetting this important verse of that prophecy, which is verse 16. And in the fourth generation they shall come hither again, and for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. Who is the fourth generation? Let's go into this verse. And the word that is used is duor. And this means four. Let's go into the word for generations. A period, a generation, a habitation, a dwelling. This means generations. Let me explain generations. I am in Job chapter 42, verse 16. Let's go into this verse. And it says, after Job lived 140 years and saw his sons and his sons' sons, even 4 generations. So his sons' sons' sons. So this is the meaning of generations. It is not by time, as 30 to 40 years is how it is said. It is meaned exactly as it is described. For father till your son. So now if we go back to Genesis 15 verse 16, and it says, in the fourth generation they shall come hither again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. What this speaking of is the generations of Abraham. Abraham is the first generation. And Yitzhak, or Isaac, is the next generation, being the second generation. And then the third generation was Yaakov, or Jacob. So then the fourth generation would be the sons of Yaakov, which are the 12 tribes, which are here. If we hop back into Genesis 15 verse 16, it says, U Duor, which means and generation. Let's go into fourth part, the fourth square, which is basically saying that the fourth generation of Abram, being the 12 tribes, Yasharim, are the ones that will come near again. So where are they coming near to? And it says, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. I'm in Genesis chapter 13, and it says right here, Abraham was dwelling in the land of Canaan. Back in Genesis 15, it says in verse 18, in that day Yahweh made a covenant with Abraham, saying unto thee, thy seed have been given this land, which is the land that he is in, the land of Canaan, from the river of Egypt, the great river, unto the river Euphrates, which is basically saying all of here. And look what it includes, the Amorites. So chapter 15 is basically talking of a nation being Matzrayim, being Egypt, and saying that these people would be slaves and afflicted there and walk out with great substance after Yahweh would judge them. They would walk out with great substance. And in the fourth generation, which is the fourth generation being Yasharal, the 12 tribes, which are the people that were slaves, their generation being Yasharal, would come back into the land of Canaan again, where the Amorites are at, which is exactly what happened in scriptures, because they spied out the land of Canaan and then went into it after they came from Mount Sinai. So they literally came, crossed over Red Sea, went to Mount Sinai, dwelled for 40 years in the wilderness, spied out the land of Canaan, and then came in and inhabited the land. And if you want to know of the substance that Yasharal was given, you can go into Exodus chapter 12. And it says, the children of Yasharal did according to the word of Moses. And they asked of the Egyptians jewels of silver and jewels of gold and raiment. And just as Yahweh prophesied that they would judge the land and be walking away with great substance, Yahweh gave the people favor in the sight of Egypt. And so they despoiled the Egyptians. They received all of these treasures, this great substance. So Mashpaka, the slaves never had a fourth generation that returned. No prophecy has been fulfilled, and no reparations have ever been paid to them. And they themselves are not of Yasharal. And African slaves have never been Yasharal. I am sorry to say these things. I really am. So then the real question, Mashpaka, is not who the nation was and who the people were anymore. The answer is how is the math add up with 400 years of affliction and only 430 years were they dwelling in Matzrayim? This is the explanation. And I agree, it is hard to understand, Mashpaka. This is stating that 430 years includes the entire period from Yahweh's covenant with Abraham when he was 75 to the time of Exodus, and 400 years specifically covers the time his descendants would be strangers and oppressed, beginning later around Isaac's waning. 30 years after the covenant. Thus 400 years of afflictions are the subsets of the 430 years sojourning. And it says the difference between the accounts of time before the oppression began was only 30 years. This is the 430 years and 400 years reference explained. The apparent discrepancies between 430 years and 400 years in biblical narratives referring to the Israelites' time in Egypt and Canaan and their period of slavery has been a subject of theological and historical textual discussions for centuries. At first glance, Exodus 12:40 states that Israelites lived in Egypt for 430 years, while Genesis 15:13 and Acts 7:6 mention 400 years of enslavement and afflictions. However, many scholars and traditions interpret these numbers not as contradictory, but as complementary, with 430 years encompassing the total sojourn in Canaan and Egypt, and 400 years specifically referring to the period of oppression. The 430-year period is explicitly mentioned in Exodus 12:40 through 41. The time that the people of Israel lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of the 430 years, on that very day, all the hosts of Yahweh went out from the land of Egypt. However, ancient manuscripts like the Septuagint, the LXX, the Samaritan, the Pentateuch, and writings of Josephus read in Egypt and Canaan, rather than in Egypt alone. This suggests the 430 years includes the time from Yahweh's covenant with Abram to Exodus, not just the time spent in Egypt. And Paul reinforces this in Galatians, stating the law was given 430 years after the covenant with Abraham, implying the 430 years span from the promise to the giving of the law at Sinai. The 400 years of slavery and afflictions are mentioned in Genesis 15:13. Then Yahweh said to Abram, "Know for a surety that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and will be servants there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years. This is echoed in the New Testament. In Acts 7:6, Yahweh spoke to this effect that this offspring would be sojourners in a foreign land, and they would be enslaved and afflicted for 400 years. Stephen links the 400 years to the time of enslavement and affliction, not the total sojourn. This distinction allows for 400 years to be subsets of the 430-year periods, reconciling the 430 and the 400 years. Many scholars and traditions reconcile the two times by proposing that the 430 years begins with Yahweh's covenant with Abraham when he was around the age of 75 in Genesis 12:14, or Genesis 12 verse 4. The 400 years begin later. I'm so sorry I'm messing up with all my words, people. Possibly with the birth of Isaac, when Abraham's offspring truly begins, or the onset of oppression in Egypt. The 30-year gap from 430 to 400 accounts for the time when Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob lived freely in Canaan before the descent into Egypt and the rise of the hostile Pharaoh. Septuagint reading of Exodus 12:40 includes Canaan in Egypt. Josephus and early Jewish traditions recognize the broader time frame. The rabbinic interpretation that the 430 years referred to the divine decree, not literal residency in Egypt. Here's the calculations. Abraham leaves Haran, which is in Mesopotamia, at the age of 75. Isaac is born when Abram is 100. Jacob enters Egypt at the age of 130. Exodus occurs at 1446 BC. So here's your timelines. From Abraham's call to Exodus is about 430 years. From Isaac's birth to Exodus is 400 years. Jacob's entry into Egypt to the Exodus is about 430 years, only if counted from 1876 BC to 1446 BC, but this creates tension with genealogies. Some propose the actual time in Egypt was 210 to 215 years, with the 430 years included the sojourning in Canaan. This aligns with the rabbinic traditions and resolves genealogical challenges. The theological and textual variants. The Masoretic text says in Egypt for 430 years. The Septuagint and the Samaritan Pentateuch says in Egypt and Canaan, supporting the broader interpretation. Some scholars argue that the 400 years are rounded. The debate reflects different theological emphasis, one on divine purpose, another on human suffering. The conclusion: 430 years and 400 years are not contradictory but complementary. 430 years equals total time from Yahweh's covenant with Abraham to the Exodus, including sojourns in Canaan and Egypt. 400 years is a period of slavery affliction between beginning later, with examples given as with Isaac or in Egypt. This understanding preserves the integrity of the biblical text across manuscripts and theological traditions, showing careful attention to the chronology and divine purpose. And I do not read from a lot of the New Testament texts. I do not read anything at this time besides Matthew, John, and Revelations. See my other videos to see why I explain that there are pseudepigraphas in all of those texts, and Paul isn't really an apostle. I have mentioned the exiles that have happened, the Assyrian exile of the northern kingdom, the Babylonian exile of the southern kingdom, the Roman exile, and the Book of Revolts that destroyed and dispersed the people. Yashral has been in slavery and bondage multiple times in multiple prophecies from multiple exiles. And none of these included Africans. And it is not mentioned in the script that we have at all. What has been done is wrong, Mashpaka. This has been extremely wrong for a long time. So please, Mashpaka, please. The only thing you could do is as the teachings of Yahushua, from what is taught, to forgive and not harbor hate. Do not be angry. Do not avenge. Do not seek to persecute. Only forgiveness would make this right. Forgive those, and they would apologize to you, which many governments and nations have already done. They have already apologized. And it is now generations that are not even in the time of this happening. New generations that are after the 2000s that have no history, ties of anything for this injustice. So the only thing that can be done is to just let it go. Say that it is forgiven. Pray and turn to the Father. Again, I'm sorry that I spoke this. So, Mashpaka, what is wrongfully done is wrongfully done. And it was done to both parties, the Israelites, Yashralim, and African slaves. So we should not take identities from each other. Do not persecute people. Find it in your heart to forgive. That is all, Mashpaka. Ahaba'u Shalom.